Okay. Well, first of all, good morning. We thank you for your attendance today. I'm Tony Crisp, and I'm the Chief of Police of the Maryville Police Department. Accompanying me this morning is District Attorney General Ryan Desmond to my right, Deputy District Attorney General Tracy Jenkins to my left, along with Maryville Police Lieutenant Rod Fernandez to my left, and Deputy Chief of Police Greg Cook to my extreme right. I'll begin with some opening remarks and statements, followed by General Ryan Desmond's remarks. At the end, we will take a few questions, but please understand that there will be some things we're not able to share with you at this time. On May the 20th, 1977, at 9:30 a.m., the Maryville Police Department officers received a call to an address on Everett Avenue inside the city of Maryville. The call was made by a Bell South technician who had found the decomposed body of in a car parked outside of the residence. The technician was at the residence for a service call that was made by a third party reporting a telephone issue. The finds were last seen alive on May the 6th, 1977, after having dinner at the King's Inn with friends in Lenore City, Tennessee. When officers and investigators responded to the scene, they discovered the partially decomposed body of Helen Fine, 54 years old at the time of her death, sitting in her car, which was parked outside of her residence. Officers also found the partially decomposed body of her husband, Maynard H. Fine, 67 years old at the time of his arrest, inside the residence. Autopsy results at that time indicated that both victims died from multiple gunshot wounds. During the next few years, the case was thoroughly investigated. Multiple pieces of evidence was processed, sent to the FBI for expert analysis, and many witnesses also were interviewed by various detectives who worked on this case. As often happens in cold cases such as this, such a horrendous and unresolved matter is never truly forgotten, especially by the family members and the detectives who worked so hard to bring those responsible to justice. After the cold case was reopened in May of 21, the investigation resulted in Maryville Police Department's presentation of this case and the facts thereof to the Blount County Grand Jury on Monday, November the 6th, 2023. The grand jury returned 2 indictments for first-degree murder against Michael Keith Fine, the victim's son, who was 34 years of age at the time of these murders. Fine was arrested yesterday around 10 o'clock by the Jefferson County, Alabama Sheriff's Office in Birmingham, Alabama. The grand jury was presented evidence, including forensic evidence, that tied Michael Keith Fine to the entry point of the residence. Additional evidence was found that tied Michael Keith Fine to the murder weapon which was used. And it was collected by the Maryville Police approximately 1 year later after those deaths at a local landfill. I would like to thank our partners with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Bureau, the Blount County Sheriff's Office for their invaluable assistance in analyzing evidence throughout this investigation. Also, to my right, District Attorney General Ryan Desmond, to my left, Deputy District Attorney General Tracy Jenkins, and their entire staff for their assistance in pursuing justice for the victims and their families. Additionally, we would like to thank the Alabama State Attorney General's Office, the Jefferson County, Alabama Sheriff's Office for their assistance in this case. Lastly, I would like to recognize Chief John R. Bluford, along with former Maryville Police Detective Johnny Tyndall, the late detectives H.D. Ashley and Wayne Tipton, who worked tirelessly in 1977 and who processed valuable evidence, which in part resulted in the arrest of Michael Keith Fine. Additionally, members of the Maryville Police Department staff, and especially Lieutenant Rod Fernandez and Detective Jeff Wallace, who both have dedicated numerous hours in the pursuit of justice. General Desmond.
Thank you. Morning. I want to thank you all for being here. After my election in 2022, shortly after, but before I was sworn in, Chief Chris came to me and he said, "You know, General, I'd like to go over a cold case with you when you take office." And I thought, okay, you know, I'm open to that. We've done a couple cold cases before. General Jenkins and I prosecuted in 2018 a man who had killed his baby in 2011, and we actually prosecuted a homicide from the sheriff's office from 1998. And I thought, okay, we've got some experience with cold cases. They have complications, but we're open. We'll look at it. So I said, Chief, what year did this homicide take place? And he said, 1977. And I thought, wow, that's only 8 years after we landed on the moon. I was not born yet in 1977. So I thought, okay, this one's going to be a little bit different. And I said, that's going to create lots of issues, Chief. You're going to have witnesses that are no longer with us. You're going to have evidence techniques and analysis that may have changed, in the 40-something years. And he told me this, and he said, General, I don't want you to make me any promises. I just want you to promise me that you will sit there with an open heart and an open mind and listen to the evidence. And I told him, well, Chief, I can do that. I'm skeptical, but I will sit down and listen. So very shortly after, we met in this exact room, and Chief laid out for me the homicide case. And Chief didn't mention this, but he actually joined the Maryville Police Department in 1977, very shortly after the homicide. He was very aware of how it was investigated when it initially took out, and I think it is a case that the Maryville Police Department has really, for decades, wanted to pursue. They wanted to pursue justice for this married couple that was murdered in 1977. And he laid out this case for me, and I thought, Chief, wow, I get it. I know why you want to go after this case, but there are issues. There are a lot of problems with prosecuting a case that is 46 years old. And all he said to me is, tell me what we need to do. Tell me what we need to do, and we'll do it. And over the last 14 months, that is exactly what has occurred. I would say, well, first we're going to have to get some of this evidence reevaluated. The technicians and the scientists who looked at this stuff in 1977 are no doubt gone. So we've got to jump through this hoop if we're going to get this piece of evidence in. We've got to jump through this hoop. And he'd say, okay, yes, sir. And a month later, 2 months later, they come back and say, here you go, there it is. And I would say, all right, here's the next step. You got to do this. And it went on like that for 14 months. I'd say, all right, y'all going to have to prove this. And they'd come back to me a month later and say, all right, here you go, what's next? So I have to commend the dedication of the Maryville Police Department, Chief Crisp, and his detectives for truly pursuing justice in this case. It is an uphill battle to prove a case that is 46 years old, but they never gave up on it. They haven't given up on it at all in that 46 years. But over the last 14 months, I have seen how dedicated they are to seeing that we bring justice to this case and we do it the right way. I remember a time we came into this exact room, and you have these tables in front of you that are about, 25 feet long, and they had 3 full tables full of evidence from this case laid out there. And we went through each piece of evidence, and we said, how are we going to get this in? Who can we find that can authenticate this document? And we made a list, and every single one of those things they followed up on. They found the way to find a person who could get that piece of evidence in to make it critical to our prosecution. So I just have to commend them. I would echo what Chief said, thanking all these departments that helped us. I would add one or two, the Attorney General's office for the state of Tennessee. I didn't know what the law was in 1977. If you were going to prosecute a case that occurred in 1977, whatever the law was is what applies. And we went through law libraries to try to find books and to try to find statutes that existed, and the Attorney General's office was instrumental to us to be able to buckle down exactly what laws applied, what rules of evidence in 1977. So I would like to thank them as well. The big thing is, and Chief Crisp and I, we talk a lot about this, our jobs are unique. We deal with very serious content, and we deal with serious decisions that can take people's liberty away for long periods of time. And both he and I, when we discuss matters such as this and other cases, the goal is always to do the right thing, right? That's what you want to do. You want to do the right thing. You want to seek truth, and you want to seek justice. And I have been asked the question about this case really since yesterday, since he was arrested. How do you charge somebody for double homicide 46 years later? How do you put an 80-year-old man in custody? And my response to that is, if you have the proof and the evidence, how do you not? How do you let these 2 people who were murdered not see some justice in our legal system if the case is there? So, how do you do it? Well, how do you not? because the Maryville Police Department pursued this case, pursued the evidence, answered all the legal hurdles or made all the legal hurdles that I asked them to do, and the evidence is there, it is our duty and it is our job to seek justice in the court systems of the state of Tennessee. So I thank you all very much. I will say, I do want to say one other thing, and this is important for the media that is here today. I tell law enforcement often that a case is not over when an arrest is made. There is always more investigation to be done, particularly in a case like this. There are a lot of people in our community that may have information related to this case that they didn't know was ever going to be prosecuted. I would encourage those individuals, if you have information related to this homicide of Helen and Maynard Fine, please come forward to us and we would be happy to hear it. In particular, based on our investigation and review of the evidence, there was a young lady who was either in high school or just out of high school who lived with the Fines in the months leading up to the homicide. We have never been able to locate or identify that individual, and we have reason to believe that that individual may have very relevant evidence related to this homicide. So those of you in the Maryville community or the East Tennessee community, if you know of anyone who lived around the Everett area of Maryville around the time of this homicide, and if there is an individual that lived with the Fines, we would very much like to talk to that individual. So please come forward. Please let us know. I cannot thank Chief Crisp and the Maryville Police Department enough. I have dealt with a lot of homicide cases, and across the board, whether the homicide is solved or whether it's unsolved, the profound impact the death of a loved one through criminal activity has on family members, on law enforcement, and on candidly prosecutors who prosecute their cases is profound. They are matters that are never forgotten. They make a deep impact on our lives, and the fact that these men and women have dedicated their lives to continuing to pursue justice and truth, no matter how old the case, no matter how cold the evidence, that is a testament to how much these individuals care about our community, and I very much commend them for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, General. And just in closing, I would just like again echo my appreciation to all our partners who assisted us in this matter. Also, I just would tell you that I have spoken with the Fines family. Personally, I've spoken to members of the family. They're grateful for the closure that has occurred up to this part of the process, and it's again just thank our staff for the hard work and dedication they've done in the pursuit of justice in this long, cold case. So thank you all very much, but if you have a couple of questions, we'll be glad to answer those if we can. Yes, sir.
During the preliminary investigation when this happened in 1977, was Michael Keith Fine questioned at that point?
I would say that Michael Keith Fine was a person of interest in 1977. It was a time later before he was formally interviewed. You know, when you're dealing with a case such as murdering a person's parents, you want to in an abundance of caution, you want to proceed very cautiously because you don't want, you know, that people would be suffering that time. So we did wait to a certain time before we actually did an interview with him.
What were some of the information or evidence that came forward a couple of years ago that made you reopen this case?
Well, we have a process here that any cold case we have, we'll reopen that case, take a look at it, see if we can come up with any new evidence that would allow us to move forward. If we can't, then we place it inactive for a while and then come back and reopen it again. So in December of 2020, I was in process of talking to a person, a law enforcement officer who was fixing to retire, and I was going to bring him on as a full-time cold case investigator. And since this was our oldest case and it was a double homicide, we wanted to start with this case. But in December of 2020, the family had reached out to me and wanted to know where we were at on the Fine case. And I said, ironically that you call me now, I said, I'm in negotiations with a person I'm fixing to bring on board, and we're going to reopen all our cold cases, and that being the first one we're going to reopen. So that started the process, and then in May of 2021 is when we actually opened that case up full time and started reinvestigating that again.
Since, we've seen technology change quite a bit from the 70s to now when you reopen the case, how much did new technology play a role into getting this evidence moved forward and finding Michael Keith Fine?
Well, I would tell you that a lot of the evidence that we had evaluated back in the 77 and 1978, as the General Desmond indicated, he told us he wanted modern science to look at that evidence again. He wanted people who were alive and could testify to what evidence was collected. So we were able to obtain some additional forensic information from some technology that exists today that didn't exist then, and I can't really comment further in regards to that.
What does it mean to you, since you have been with the department since '77, knowing that this cold case has been solved and you found the person suspected of killing this couple?
Well, it's certainly rewarding, but really the rewarding part goes to the families. We're in law enforcement. We're a tool that assists families most of the time in their worst day. And obviously in 1977 on May the 20th is the worst day for the Fine family. And so I think the rewarding part is that we're able to do our job and pursue justice and bring the persons that's responsible for such a crime to answer for that, and the families to know that hey, it just didn't end in 1977. That no one's still forgotten.
And to speak further to that, it's not uncommon. Unfortunately, there are a small handful of cold cases that exist in Maryville and Blount County, and every few years you will get a phone call from a family member just checking in. Is anything going on with my loved one's case? Have you all found anything additionally? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no, and sometimes the answer is, now's a good time to relook into it. And I think this is a great example to those families that, yes, it's very unfortunate that oftentimes homicides aren't always solved quickly. They aren't always solved immediately, but there is zero doubt that the men and women who are tasked with solving those homicides and bringing those individuals to justice that have committed that murder, they do not give up on those cases. They do not forget those cases. They never will. So this is a prime example of that. And I will tell families when they call me over the next few years, listen, just like we didn't give up on this case, we're not going to give up on your case. I promise they will still look into it. They will keep digging, and you never know when that magic is going to happen, when that stone that wasn't unturned gets unturned, that makes things click. So this is just a prime example of how not giving up on justice is really the mission of law enforcement. They should be commended for that.
And just a question for you, Mr. Desmond. You had talked about this female who possibly lived in the home with the Fines. Do we have any information if they're a suspect in this, or just somebody who has more information?
No, they would not be a suspect at all in this, but they are an individual who observed some things in the weeks or months leading up to the homicide that potentially could be very relevant in what the defendant in this case is accused of doing. And while we have some information about the person, we have never been able to positively identify that individual. We do know that they lived at that residence for a moderate period of time prior to the homicide, and that they saw and heard things that are potentially relevant to the homicide. And the person would have only been 18 or 19 years old at the time. So we would very much like to talk to that person if they're willing to speak to us.
Do we know if they're in the Maryville area, East Tennessee?
We do not. Unfortunately, we do not. We know that they were in the Maryville. They went to school in the Maryville area at the time. That's really, other than that, and a nickname which I don't want to reveal just yet to make sure we have the right person. I don't have much more information other than it was a young lady who had either in high school or just graduated high school in 1976, 77, and lived with Helen and Maynard Fine on Everett Avenue for some period of time.
Approximately how many cold cases does the department have, and now that this one's been solved, what is the new oldest one?
We have two that's left. One is a 1980 case, the other is a 2002 case, and I can just tell you that we are actively working the 1980 case that we're going in sequence of the time of these murders, and we have been actively working on that case for a number of months, and we have evidence that we have processed and have sent to laboratories, but at that point, that's where we're at.
Chief has already told me he has another one he wants to go over it with. I'm like, fantastic.
And the family members that you mentioned that have been checking in, are you able to describe their relationship to Michael Fine, if they're siblings, cousins, anything like that?
You know, it's a very small family, and I really don't want to get into that. I can just say they would be a close relative of Michael Fine.
I'd also just like to touch again on this woman who was living in the house. Do we know why she was living with the Fines?
We don't know exactly why, and we learned that information back during the late 70s. We could never establish her completely then. She had already left the area. Because when she lived there was prior to the Fines murder, but we believe that she knows things that could be relevant to us, but we never could locate her then, and we've tried, you know, with all the technology out there today, we've really even tried harder to find her, and so far we've not. So the general and I talked, and just by chance, if someone was, you know, if she was watching the news or saw something come up, that it may spur a phone call to us.
Do we know if she was living at the house at the time they were murdered, or was she gone?
No, she was not. She'd been gone several months or several weeks prior to that, at least.
And just one more question for you here. How were you guys able to locate Michael Keith Fine down in Alabama?
We've kind of kept up with Michael Keith Fine for years, since he was a person of interest, so we kind of knew his general whereabouts.
So it was really just staying, like, he was always a person of interest, you just kind of kept a track of where he was going?
We'd just check every now and then just to see if A, if he was still alive, and you know, and B, where he was residing.
Is there a timeline yet for when he'll be transported back to Tennessee?
He'll have to go through an extradition hearing there in the state of Alabama. The general could probably speak to.
My understanding is there will probably, his first appearance on extradition will likely be today. If he waives extradition, he could come up here relatively quickly. If he does not waive, it could take, you know, some days or weeks in order to establish extradition parameters. There's a legal process for doing that through the governor's office. So depending on what occurs today or tomorrow, it may be a day or two, it may be a week or two.
Okay. Yes.
Have you found the .38 caliber that was supposed to have been used? That was back in 1977.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that we have recovered the weapon. I can't get into the description of that weapon other than I can say it was a firearm, and we did recover that in 1978.
Are you able to share what his believed motive was?
Not at this time.
So you have a motive, you just don't want to share it right now?
We have suspicions that we know, and I think I can share this in general if I start to get out of my lane.
Just to cover for Chief,
yeah.
so the rules of professional conduct limit what a prosecutor can say extrajudicially about the facts and evidence of a case, and I've also cautioned Chief that we don't want to taint any potential jury pool, we don't want to reveal any evidence. He has a right to a fair and just trial in court, and we want to make sure that we preserve his right to that. So we do have to be somewhat careful and limited about any facts or evidence that we would go into publicly, if that makes sense. I think yes, we can establish a motive, but I don't think we should go into the specifics of how we would establish that motive publicly at this time.
Do you remember what month in 1978 the weapon was found?
April, I think.
April 1978.
Yeah.
And do you know why the wife of Michael Fine identified the bodies after they were found instead of him? They were both living in Knoxville, my understanding.
Yes, and I can't answer that. Okay?
All right.
Well, thank
Thank
you
you
all
all so
again
very
very much. Yes, we thank you.